Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Defense Disrupted. I'm Ian Kalin, CEO and co-founder of Turbine One. I'm honored to be joined today by retired Lieutenant General Mike Dana, who has served for many years in the United States Marine Corps and has been an advisor to many an aspect of defense tech seeking to advance national security, and also those that are still in uniform. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Let's get started with a few simple questions. I'm going to outline 4 short rapid-fire questions as a means to hopefully tell a little bit about your background and years of service. What was your best job and worst job in the Marine Corps? What was your first and last job in the Marine Corps? So we're going to hit it from the north, south, east, west of your years in service. Any reflections to share?
Yeah, great. Thanks for that question. So first job was a tank platoon commander in 2nd Tank Battalion at Camp Lejeune. Was on M68-1s, which are now museum pieces. Last job as director of the Marine Corps staff 37 years later, and finished out my time in 2019. But I was, I had a very, very fortunate career. I had great people, had a blast. I miss it every day. I don't miss the Pentagon. I don't miss that at all. But I definitely miss being around Marines and just their sense of purpose and the camaraderie and all that goes with that.
So that was first job and last job. I think you mentioned some Pentagon things along the way. So what, if you look back on that, so can we expand on those a little bit? What else stands out to you?
Yeah, so I think, my best job, and I think every military guy that talks to you is going to say the same thing. But I was fortunate enough to have command 5 different times. As a young lieutenant, as a captain, as a lieutenant colonel, as a general officer, and there's nothing like command because I'm surrounded by young, bright people. It's a blast every day. There's that sense of purpose. There's the energy and the enthusiasm that, the Marines bring to the table. And I just love being in command. And that was 10 years out of 37, I'm in command. And that's kind of like, the nirvana land. I mean, it's wonderful. And it's not all wonderful because, Marines get in trouble a lot. Those things happen. But that's a small percentage of it because you're really just spending your time with, great Marines getting the mission done. So my worst job is I did joint duty 3 times. I was at NORTHCOM, EUCOM, and PACOM. I'm not going to say which command I was in, but I was in a job where I was in what they call a skiff, so that's the compartmentalized space where there's no sun. I mean, it's just, you're in a dark space. And I spent 13 months, 6 days a week, like moss or a mushroom, in the skiff. And it was 12-hour days. And I wasn't in sync with my boss, which is my problem, not his. And it was me trying to learn how to be a good planner and putting plans together. And I have to tell you, it was not fun. Out of there, I went to command, which was just wonderful. But I think what I learned most about that job was that you really got to be self-critical. Look at yourself in terms of why is the boss not happy with the products I'm giving him? Because this hurts every time I go in to see him and it's not going well. So I think it's just really important to understand your boss's intent, how he or she likes information, because everybody, the old adage, micro-inform so you don't get micromanaged. I mean, that works with some folks. With this particular boss, it did not. And so you got to kind of adjust your style to what your boss wants to do. But I'm not going to complain. I still had fun. I'll say where it was. I was in Stuttgart, Germany, so you can't complain. I mean, nobody can feel sorry for you when you're living in Stuttgart. Because NORTHCOM, I was in Colorado Springs looking at Pikes Peak, Stuttgart, in Stuttgart. And then PACOM, I'm looking at, Waikiki out the window. So there's nothing but goodness there.
Well, when there was a window, it sounds like those skiff life, you made and actually it makes it even worse where the proximity to that kind of beauty is actually just feels many more miles away when you know that you can't get through the door. It sounds like you're most grateful for the time in the field. It sounds like maybe that's another way of saying it, that it's away from the paper and more towards the folks that are at the front. And I think that's the aspect of the command. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, you are. But what I tell young people, and again, I try to be a good recruiter when I'm out in town. If I see the kid in the grocery store working or, wherever, or the ball field, what other job can you spend time outdoors, get paid to work out, be with people pretty much of like mind, and then go to the field? I mean, that was my first 10 years in the Marine Corps. So, I literally went from that free range, area to the skiff.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, what a hard transition that is. Yeah. So
as you look back in your time in service, it does seem, from my perspective, that the Marine Corps is in transformation. There's force modernization. There's a level of kind of recognition of how these warfighters need to adapt to the modern threat. Although I love all my children equally, Navy, Army, Air Force, it is, from my perspective, and this is my I'm reporting this to you. I'm not defending it per se, but I'd love to see if you see it yourself from your perspective. The Marine Corps seems to be most aware of the need to transform and is acting most urgently on it. Again, no harsh criticism of Navy and Army, but that's just my sense, whether it's in hearing folks present at Capitol Hill or talking to folks that are working with exercises. I just get the sense that Marines just are a body in action. Now, you say you left in 2019. To maybe a bit of an unfair question. I'd love to talk more about what you've seen since that time. But has that been your perspective as you look back over the decades? Am I reading things the wrong way?
Yeah, I'd even go back farther. I think if you look at the Marine Corps pre-World War II, General Krulak, what I call General Krulak the Elder, wrote the book First to Fight, and just talked about the Marines' ability to adapt to any warfighting environment. Because in the 20s, early 30s, it's the banana wars, and then you go to full-scale conventional war in the Pacific in World War II. And I think, one thing that's really interesting is just really tactical, but some of the work that I'm doing on contested logistics is if you look at, Marine operations early on in the conflict, Guadalcanal, we're constantly learning. In the center of gravity of the Marine Corps, and I'm very biased because I spent 5 years with infantry battalions, it's the infantry battalion. It's the infantry formations, it's the infantry division. And what they did in World War II is they realized that, hey, in this landing, we probably needed more landing support at Guadalcanal. Aviation did a great job. We probably need to think more through how we support that logistically. And then artillery, because you want more fires and lethality for the fight. And we kept innovating. And then aside is we did looking at the infantry squad, how big it is, right? So you literally go from small to big. And you kind of look at the organization, how it's doing in combat, and then you make adjustments to the structure over time. I think we did that very well in World War II. Then folks like General Krulak, what they're doing is they're an advisor and really an observer against the Japanese, the Chinese in that fight. And he's going, wow, those landing craft, that's probably the right answer, right? So we adopt those kind of things. But if you read the book, he has a hard time getting that idea, that innovation, that type of landing craft kind of into the pipe, Higgins boat, all that kind of stuff. But, we're kind of schizophrenic because we are very innovative, but the way that the current capability development processes are, it's challenging. And bear with me on this quick tangent, but I know you know this is, there's an old saying, no bad battalions, just bad battalion commanders. Well, I would say in the capability development system, there's no bad people, but man, there's bad processes, right? Because people will do what they're incentivized to do, what they're directed to do. So if you look at the federal acquisition regulations, you look at the processes that we have, they are not conducive to agility, to speed. And we tend to look at the world through a FIDIC lens, right? Instead of, hey, your industry and industries in Silicon Valley, they're like, wow, we got to innovate at speed right now. And we're kind of like, hey, come back to me on that in about 5 years. I'm being a little unfair, obviously, and it's the easy target to shoot at all the time. But what I would say is we need a Goldwater Nichols 2.0. The first Goldwater Nichols concentrated on trying to make more of a joint force, establish the combatant commands and all that goodness. But I think the real issue, the impediment to innovation and being ready for the next conflict, is to build the innovative speed and build the scale like right away. And we have that kind of capability. If you look at what's going on in the Ukraine, and I was thinking of this during my run this morning. I run very slowly, by the way. But I was running and I'm going, if I were still active duty, I would go, hey, Congress, give me $50 million. I promise you I won't waste a penny. I'm going to take a flight to Kiev, and then I'm going to outsource drone production in 22 different facilities in the Ukraine that are being done in garages. They're going to be small, medium, and large. Maybe they have a 70% readiness rate. I really don't care, but I'll be able to get it now, okay, without all the layers of, it's got to be, approved here, approved there. And I'm hyper-caffeinated this morning, so bear with me on this one. But if you look at the entire unmanned portfolio, that is the future. Because in a future threat environment, it's all about dispersion. It's all about not being seen. Because if you can be seen, you can be killed. If you're talking, you're going to be killed. As the Ukraine. These systems, if you just can produce at scale, the Ukrainian attack on the bombers, it's absolutely brilliant. that tactic is just absolutely thinking at the problem in a different way. And I look at it this way, not a tangent. I drive a 1984 Chevy K20 truck. Doesn't yell at me if I don't have my seatbelt down. There's no electronics. It's just a very basic truck. What do I want in logistics for unmanned platforms? Air, sea, subsea, and ground. I want 1984 Chevy K20s. I don't want your bolt-in ISR on it. I don't need other kinds of survivability packages. I just want flying trucks. And to me, what I don't understand is why we resist that. Because we can't help ourselves in terms of these platforms and just bolting a lot of different things down there that you really don't need. Not that I feel strongly about it.
So why do we resist it?
It's, again, I go back to it's the process, right? And
the process is maintained by the people behind it. I completely agree with you that if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. So is it just that is a lack of leadership to change it? You mentioned Goldwater Nichols 2.0. It's an interesting phrase, but that's a form of power, right? There was a subpoena power, there was appropriations power that forced a set of impacts. But that came down to folks that had a constituency, perhaps. But it's just leadership. It's just some folks who, in a position of power, chose to act on an urgent opportunity, we can call it. Is it just that simple to overcome these incentives?
So I might have this wrong, but on paper, I was the head contracting authority for the Marine Corps when I was the head of logistics on paper, because I had some brilliant SES and great 15s that would execute. But they went out of their way to make sure that I didn't break the rules, right? Because bad things happen to senior officers that break the rules. And to your point, the rules need to be changed. I think the book needs to be rewritten to a degree, because if you operate your company and then other companies, throughout the United States, if you operate on our model, and here's the thing, anytime you see people like that come into a meeting, Defense Innovation Board, right, and they listen to our briefs, I remember, the Google rep was in the room we were briefing, and he goes, "Why do you do it that way?" Well, that's what the book says. Well, it's stupid, but it's
yeah, but we have fun with this too. I was briefly in SES, and I briefly was an acquisition official myself. And so while I completely empathize with the waggy finger, risk advertisers, their job is to scare the hell out of you. If you sign this, you can go to jail. Really? I don't think that's true. But they're very good at scaring people. And that fear becomes a mode of operation. When there's 1,000 people who can scare you, only one person who's got the bravery to sign something. Yeah. That person is usually looking for a new job anyway, so they don't care. If I get fired, I was job searching anyway. So the longevity of the rebellious folks is usually not very long.
Right.
Okay. So I hear the point about the Google. Why do you do it that way? Yeah, but there's a hell of a lot of tech companies who, for some reason, have headquarters in Ireland, maybe because they get better tax treatment. Like I would say the rules are there for good reason, and everyone must comply with the law and regulations and high ethics, in my opinion. And things like Replicator wasn't illegal. It was reprogrammed. Things like DIU took leadership and some great championship from the Ash Carters and the Mike Browns to push things forward. And I would say both of those examples, those are, in my opinion, acquisition activities that are outside the normal environment. They didn't wait for requirements, didn't wait for the PEOs. They said, we're going to do something a little different. Now, I don't know I'm not necessarily a defense of Replicator and DIU, but I think is a well-funded example, we're trying to change the system. But even they have, I would say, marginal numbers. I love DIU, but their total percentage of federal acquisitions is probably pretty small. I don't know, 1% maybe. It's not that big. So while those are great brands, they're not at the core structure, right? Yeah. And so I think that's where I have some, given your level of experience and leadership. So I'm being a terrible host here because I'm letting some of my own opinions come through. Oh. But I empathize with what you're saying. But I don't think you need to break the rules to get things done, or that Google has it all figured out. I think they're maybe aggressively using the rules that already exist and still finding a way to get things done in spite of the rules, not only because of them.
Yeah. On a related note, the comment I would always make about DIU, AFWorks, all these innovation organizations, which I applaud the effort, right? But part of me, because it's the New Yorker in me, which can get negative, I guess, is anytime you're creating what I call extrajudicial organizations outside the mainstream process, first they're always going to be, hey, who moved my cheese, right? Or because it's a turf war to a degree. And to me, we would benefit from making the entire system have that type of outlook. vice, have these external, for lack of a better way of saying it, organizations trying to influence innovation. So,
what part of New York, by the way? I grew up in Greenwich Village. I didn't realize you.
Yeah, I'm from upstate, outside of Syracuse, but my grandfather was a World War I veteran, and then 6 uncles in World War II, and they're all from the New York City area. So I worked in Manhattan from age 12 to 22 at my Greek grandfather's wholesale florist. So, and people always tease me that I worked in a florist. I said, it's backbreaking work. It's really hard.
How do we make it this far in the podcast without dropping any F-bombs, given our New York backgrounds? I mean, we're naval services and veterans. I'm impressed that we made it this far.
You love New York City, favorite city on the planet.
And I think what we're seeing here, you mentioned it's not just the language, but maybe the culture. I think you and I are skeptics. There's some part of us that sounds like that. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And I think maybe that's where the fear mongering of regulators of civilian staff trying to keep commanders out of prison for contracting. I think that's probably where you and I had some similarities. We're just like, is it really illegal? I don't think it is. I think you don't think you've read the regs. I think you're interpreting something that makes your job perhaps feel more important.
Yeah,
I'm oversimplifying a stereotype, and so it's not fair to your point. The great civilians that are underpaid and overworked, not able to get $1,000 or 1,000-page packages through a system.
Right.
But there's still, I think that kind of questioning attitude that is maybe not shared by the history of the acquisition system. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. And as you were talking, I was thinking about Admiral Paparo, who's absolutely brilliant. He had a comment the other day where he said, you can't outsource risk. Like, a commander owns the risk. So you have to have a commander that's willing to, literally put it on the line, for the organization, for the people, and not do the, hey, why don't you handle this one? Yeah. I thought it was a brilliant statement on his part.
Yeah. Let's talk about risk. Okay, so in roughly 6-ish years that you've been out of a proper uniform, I understand that you have been advising folks from all areas of this great national security ecosystem, from the startups to some bigs, even some folks that are currently in command and senior command positions. Let's focus on the startup, that innovation ecosystem that we were just talking about a little bit, without necessarily naming names. What are some of the ways in which people have broken through? How is that community succeeding?
Yeah.
And how can they, or what have you observed them, the tools and process and techniques that they've employed to get through the system that we were just approaching with great skepticism?
So I'd say a couple of things. First, persistence and patience, which can at times be at odds with each other, right? Because when you're persistent, you want to get it done now. Again, it's the New York. It's like, oh my God, we got to get there. But it's that very deliberate, in a way, but what I call energized, deliberate way of developing a campaign plan to get you from where you're at today to perfect world programmer record, right? That's the nirvana. That's what you're looking for. But I think companies that do these things succeed. Number one, they turn very complex topics and capabilities into common person language. But most importantly, it ties to a military requirement. Now, the military might not know that it's a requirement yet, right? They might not know that yet, but it's your job, in terms of the company, to say, hey, in terms of C5ISRT kill chain, you need the following capabilities. Explain to me how you make us more lethal, more survivable, more maneuverable. So put it in language that even Uncle Joe can understand. And I would say that Uncle Joe's got a college degree. He served 3 or 4 years in the Marine Corps and Navy. I mean, it's again, the common man, make that message resonate, and then create a value proposition. And it's not, and no offense to companies that do this, but the companies that go, save the whales, this and everything, it's, these esoteric kind of big thought. No, it's like, what? We build at cost, we do it on time, and our performance of our platforms is absolutely outstanding. I mean, tell a clear, concise, compelling story. Have a narrative that anybody that would listen to that, the typical elevator speech, will go, this company's on to something. And again, and this is a compliment, but engineers are really smart people. But the problem with some engineers is they're really smart people, because when you ask them a question, they open up the top of their head and everything they know comes out. And here's the thing, when an old guy like me asks a question, just answer the question, right? And answer in a way that addresses his either concern, or you're trying to educate him a little bit more, but use a language that, again, resonates with everybody. And then on the persistence part, mean, relationships matter, right? And it takes time to kind of do that meet and greet, and you do what they call a stakeholder analysis, like all the different folks that are in the ecosystem that impact your capability, either funding it, sourcing it, endorsing it. It takes time to build those relationships, and realize that when you go in and talk to a senior leader, and I know know this very well because you do it very well, is when you're talking to the senior leader, it's important to talk to the people that work with the senior leader. Because in my case, I had a senior enlisted master gunny with multiple combat tours. I had an aide that was just phenomenal. Jeremy was great. Dan Furiak was great. Jeremy Nelson. And anytime industry came to me, the first thing I would say, I get those two together and along with my SCS deputy and go, hey, what do you think of these guys? And they would go, you're awesome, boss. I mean, this is on fire. You have to support this one. Or you would get no, not so sure, boss. And that it matters how you treat the front office and how you socialize things with really smart people that are informing the boss is really important. But if I missed anything there, back at you, or back at me, I should say.
I think you're sharing a masterclass in how to induce change. And I'm just thinking through my own personal experiences. There's no disagreement. The question that was forming in my mind was how the current senior leaders, if I'm the Commandant of the Marine Corps, how do I look at all these fast talking, super smart engineer types that are trying to change the world with the latest AI invention? And, I'm thinking, I'm not digging into the code. I'm not asking for a financial statement. I'm looking at my staff and say, hey, there's a Marine try to pressure test this thing. If they kick that out in the field, what'd they say?
Right.
Now, and there's I guess the struggle I'm thinking through is this kind of bizarre aspect of the information delivery. So there's relationships. I mentioned relationships. So that's trust. That's tribal, right? In a good way. They have their staff and feeding, but the staff, they ain't engineers or aeronautics experts. Right. They have their own perspectives. So there's, I think, the struggle for the Silicon Valley life or the stereotype of the venture life versus how senior military leaders make decisions is that the product performance is not necessarily part of what you just said. And it's important. It has the widget has to work. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I think there's a reason you didn't mention it just now, because that had to have been tested prior to the pitch.
Yeah.
If I'm selling a search tool, I'm going to show up with a search tool. You're going to search the search tool. You're going to use it. Okay, and that's it. The product works or it doesn't. That's not necessarily how the military makes decisions. The what's called an venture product-led growth. Can that happen in the national security ecosystem? Maybe. But the decision makers want that tested elsewhere, perhaps. Yeah. And I'm trying to reconcile, what maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but it's a cultural difference in other conversations that I'm seeing in different parts of the country.
The Einstein quote, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. I mean, that should always be going through your head when you're talking to senior leaders. The second thing is, and this will get to the performance part and the requirement, is being able to articulate with your audience, whoever that audience is, 4-star to Colonel to GS-15, whoever it is, right, that you have a good grasp of the future threat environment, right? With the Marine Corps, you really want to be focusing on the Pacific. And these are not buzzwords, what I'm going to say. I mean, it's a multi-domain fight. I mean, because it's air, sea, subsea, or ground, space, and cyber, right? It's Marine forces distributed in the Pacific, which have to aggregate, get together to really project lethality, okay, then disaggregate to survive. I mean, understanding the Chinese threat, the contested environment. A lot of people go, the logistics is contested. It's always been contested. It's been contested since the Greeks. I mean, it's been going on forever. It's not anything new, but what is definitely new is the lethality, the speed, the precision of modern munitions and systems that, in World War II, it's what I call a manned drone, which is a kamikaze, right? Now we've got anti-ship missiles. We've got, drones that can swarm and hit ships or fix facilities ashore. But being able to have what I call I mean this in a good way, adult conversation with a senior military leader and his specific area of expertise. What I mean by that is, if you go to the Marine Corps, you understand what the Marine Air Ground Task Force is all about, how we integrate and optimize a lot of different capabilities in one formation. But if it's Air Force, they've got a different approach. The Navy, Sea Control, But having that kind of discussion where you not only understand that your widget is really important and its performance will help make better decisions, be more lethal, be able to talk that, but then to be able to widen the discussion with that person. Because, I'll tell you what happens, and I'll talk about you, is after I talk to you, you just sit there. I sat there with the boss and said, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's got a vision. So if you walk away from a meeting like that, there's nothing but goodness, right? Because you've articulated your capability. You make sure that the customer knows that you understand his organization, the fighting environment that will be in, that all goodness flows from that. Because I've seen these go really south, right? Because what'll happen is the poor.
Well, you interrupted there. This for fun. I was going to have a question about the tactics of the Pacific, but just for fun, let's talk about some abominations. Can you said some things have gone south. Share some stories. Let's get. Don't shame the folks in particular. Can you give an example of a spectacular disaster that didn't go well?
So I'll narrow it down and say I'll narrow it down and also be very. I'm not going to dodge the question. It was logistics command and control, right? Okay. So I personally believe to this day, our current logistics command and control systems are Byzantine and do not meet need, right? So a company, came in and essentially lectured me that I didn't really understand the command and control part of it. And it wasn't, it was not their platform's fault. And what I would say is, what I look at is, does that young corporal or sergeant on the pointy end that's, in a dusty area in Afghanistan or in a warehouse down in Camp Lejeune, right? Is it user-friendly, the system? Does it provide transparency over all maintenance and supply activities, right? And logistics is bigger than that. I'm just focused on the supply and maintenance part. And does it meet need? In other words, can it be just like using this great, it's both great and bad, but great in terms of being able to just easily track, plan, execute, right? I want a system that has what I'll call the different modalities and can flex the different requirements and systems, right? And this company kept going, well, you just don't understand that it's okay that you use this system, even though it's got 63 different prompts you have to do before you actually get to the end product. That's like, hey, get out of the office. I mean, I'm never rude, even though I keep going back to New York. I'm not rude. Just like, get out of the office, man. You don't understand what I'm saying. And by the way, maybe they didn't understand because I didn't articulate well enough, but I want a logistics command control system that's as good as what the operators have. And what the operators have, we need to be able to nest and plug into that system because we need fires, we need survivability, we need intel, and we just tend to, here's our little log C2 system. The little engine that could, no, it can't, at the end of the day.
I would love to have another room. Yeah, you see, I'm going to lecture you on what you know about the logistics. Maybe it's like what's the word, the Schadenfreude of like watching just bad things happen. I would have been like, oh, well, why would you think that type of, I don't even know, maybe it's part of our culture here. There's a lot of chauvinism, a lot of entitlement, a lot of folks are like, I know more than you do. Oh, really? All right, let's see it. That would have been quite the entertaining train wreck.
I'll tell you what I know, though. I know that I don't know a lot about.
If someone doesn't have that humility, they're probably not learning from the warfighter or understanding those requirements. So let's spread the love a little bit. Let's see if we can help some folks, going back a topic, understand more of what we'll call the tactics of the Pacific into PACOM fight that you were talking about. Let's see if we can help translate the needs so that better stories can be told to help folks on all parts of this ecosystem. So that's the framing for the question I'm about to ask you. Of course, without sharing anything in the classified or even close to it realm, what are some of the unique aspects of, you mentioned logistics, so let's say contested environments. So what are the contested environments that would help more folks that are mission driven, trying to help American warfighters that are thinking about, well, I'm seeing all the news about the Pacific. I see all the great speeches from Paparo. I'm seeing these words, but I still don't understand how contested is contested. He mentioned that it's not that old, but the scale of it is new. Okay, well, what does that mean? Yeah. What can you share a little more insights in terms of if you were back in command, the kind of things you wish you would have had?
Yeah, I think as you look at the Pacific threat, I'm going to go back to World War II, right? And this will lead to answering your question. Is the American logistical planners and the operational commanders in World War II, I'm going to talk about the Guadalcanal campaign, absolutely brilliant, because they had forward bases that they established that provided aircraft the ability to range initially and then get to Guadalcanal and operate from Guadalcanal. But they did what I call a logistics and teleprep of the battle space. In other words, they looked at all the terrain of distance. They looked at key littoral terrain, sea choke points, where they had to project force to defeat the Japanese. And then they built bases that had logistics support that were closer to the fight than what the Japanese did. Because the Japanese logistics bases were for lack of a better way of saying, were overextended. They had to go really long distances. So we won the war of positioning, so to speak. And it's not going to be very different in this next conflict. And God forbid we do a conflict with China. But I would say the other thing is in World War II is it was supply chain, right? It is no kidding a chain with links in it that could have been severed. And it's a very, for lack of a better way of saying it, very narrow kind of projection of logistics support. And I'd say today for the modern fight, we need to create a logistics web, a logistics mesh, right? That has the ability to regenerate and to move supplies and sustainment rapidly from one point to the next. Because you've got, as you look at the Pacific, the Marine Corps has this, you have stand-in forces at certain locations that have on-hand logistics support, but then we're going to have to project to other areas, key littoral terrain. Won't get into the details, but you read the news, you can see wherever we operate, that's pretty key littoral terrain. And that way we're creating multiple different options for logistics support. So industry coming in, here are the bins that I kind of talked that there's a market for. One more time, logistics command and control that gives you, allows you to optimize the force. And in a perfect world with AI or some tools is to be able to do predictive logistics planning, right? Because the system as we have it from World War II is, people would put in requests for support, but there was a lot of kind of pull logistics by pushing logistics out. So if you can forecast requirements ahead of time, right, then everything in that supply web can be geared and maximized to support that requirement. And modeling goes into that and other types of things where that would come in handy. Next is transportation, intra-theater, both air and sea and subsea. And this is where I just go bonkers because I think folks look at World War II where we, Kaiser Shipyard, San Francisco, generating a Liberty ship every 3 weeks, 5,000 ships, black and gray bottom in World War II. That's not us today. Now, there's countries that could probably produce at that scale, China being one of them, unfortunately, right? But what other modes can we create to move gears, supply, sustain from point A to point B? So if you come up with an airborne drone that can go, and this is the vision, maybe not today, I can carry 500 pounds, 2,000 miles. And you go, oh my God, there's no way. You can't. No, you can't. People like you, now I'm loving engineers, all right? Now people like you can come up with systems that can fly that far, that fast, with that kind of capacity. Same thing with at sea and semi-submersibles. I mean, I think you've seen like the drug running type boats that they're using. But think about it and create a family. And this is General Skalenka's term, and I love the term. It's family of expeditionary platforms. Create systems, small to big, layered and tiered, that can project that sustainment. And by the way, if you lose a couple, who cares, right? Because you're making hundreds of them. And years ago, by the way, another great idea is I think it was John Hopkins came up with this. It's called the Kraken, and it was a drone, but could go in salt water, drop down to the ocean floor. And I'm not talking Marianas Trench. I mean, it's got to be like 50, 60 feet. But then it could just sit there, and then you activate it, comes up, and then it goes to point of need. And then you can have a mothership, because if you look in Vietnam, by the way, the Army is really good at creating floating barges and systems for helicopters and for ships and for the Navy, not ships, boats. And they were able to, provide sustainment that way. So those options are all out there. I mean, there's unlimited potential. And I get so excited about it when I was active duty, because can't you see that this is the future? And then people go, man, that's not it. And I could be wrong. I mean, there's things I could have wrong, because I don't have that kind of hubris. I know I got the right solution, but I'm telling you, unmanned is the future. AI enhanced systems are the future, and man-machine teaming. Okay, and I'm going to get into the work that you're in. Excuse the tangent. Is I think in man-machine teaming, we've got to be able to figure out how the cognitive capability of the human mind, right? There's a book called Mozart's Brain and the Fighter Pilot, and it talks about how every human being has a cognitive limit. right? In terms of processing. So how do you create an AI platform that makes everybody, just not commanders, you make better decisions? How do you create that kind of information at a flow rate and in a packaged way that the human can assimilate it and not be overwhelmed, right? That's where you want to go in the future. I mean, those kind of tools are going to give you what I call decision overmatch against the enemy, right? Because you're moving at machine speed. I mean, I think my only concern with that is, it kind of leads into with precision munitions and all that is, okay, human in the loop, human on the loop. When do you just let the machine do its thing, or when do you have to actually get involved? And you got to kind of sort out all those protocols and the legalities. Cher's book, Army of None, talks about that. So anyway, all right, I'm almost coffeeed out, so keep going.
Well, I'm just getting started because I think I've reached my pinnacle insight here. You talked a lot as a theme of logistics and supply in your reflections today. You just mentioned now, though, the roles of which AI and manned and unmanned teaming is changing the fight. One of the things I heard recently as a lesson from Kyiv is that modern warfare has World War I and World War III at the same time. Unfortunately, it's not just one or the other. And so the question I have for you in closing is the insight I was just alluding to is the AI supply chain. There is a distance between the sensor and the shooter. There is a distance between the data and the server. Okay. So if the sensor is forward, but the AI machine is in an air-conditioned cloud in the Pentagon, the distance between them has a supply chain constraint, just like munitions has. The speed of AI becomes the speed of munitions. There are constraints in each of those networks and supply chain lines.
Yeah.
So where do you think then, sir, is that recognition and future opportunity for the AI supply chain of those capabilities you were just talking about?
Well, you can correct me, but I think with AI, I mean, there's a high energy requirement, right, to do the computing power, literally. By the way, interesting brief the other day showed China's electric capacity compared to the United States, and they are like 3 to 1 more than us, which if you kind of think long range, okay, if data is the future and chip production and AI, you need a lot of power to do that. But I think that the thing is, I'm not dodging the question, but if you were coming in to brief me, I would want you to provide me an AI vulnerability map, right? That said, hey, here's the capability and capacity of the system under these assumptions of location, power generation, what model it is, so to speak. And then here are key vulnerabilities in that system. And I'm going to do one more tangent, I'm sorry. Because what concerns me the most is what I call the simultaneity of a future conflict, where we're attacked in every domain. We're attacked by cyber and we're attacked in space. Because the Chinese, they're on the road to weaponizing space. And and then you have conventional forces that can generate either kinetic or non-kinetic effects, right? So if all of that is happening at the same time, right, even with AI enhanced decision-making tools, I think we're going to get overwhelmed. We have the ability to get overwhelmed. So we need, and I mean this in a positive way, redundant systems, right, as backup, because the primary is going to get knocked out. But imagine if you were dealing with a colonial pipeline / Ukraine attacking the bomber event, and where all that's going on in CONUS, and then you have something going on overseas at the same time. Because in World War II, then they did an amazing job in World War II, amazing, but it's almost like conflict in slow motion, right? Because it's going over years to get there, right? And I just think today it could be over pretty quick. And that guess is always wrong, by the way, because everybody goes, oh, the war won't last that long. We're going to be home by Christmas, but it never works that way. But I think with cyber attack, space attack, and then all these other capabilities that they can bring to bear at the same time, that simultaneity, because the thing in combat and conflict, he who owns the clock wins. He who drives the tempo wins. And I just think that we're really good. I mean, I'm not patting, I am patting us on the back. I think the military, I'm an old retired guy, but we are really good at what we do. But I tend to think we mirror image a lot, right? And we kind of look at adversaries and go, well, we're going to do it this way. They're going to do it the same. I think you really need to understand what they could bring to bear at the same time against us. And if it's more than one adversary, that's, because we can handle that in World War II because we had time and space. We don't have that today. So I didn't answer your question, but I enjoyed talking about that anyway.
Well, hopefully more to follow, sir. So the final question here, if folks want to continue the conversation, where is the best spot to engage with you? Are you on the LinkedIns of the world for maybe that young Marine who's thinking about their future? Is there a place for folks to follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, and I really, the best part of my job, because I'm 65 years old, so I'm like ancient, but I work with people what I call the 35 under 35. So I work with all these young ones. This is at Palace Environs, is the company that I'm with that I really enjoy working with. And I talk to old people too. I don't, but I really enjoy talking to young people, because that's the future. Because people say, oh, this generation, they're different. Well, no kidding, they're different. I got that, but they're absolutely just as smart, hardworking. And you just see these people I work with at Palace. I sit there and go, how did I get here? They're amazing. So love to talk to anybody that's got an innovative idea or just wants to shoot the breeze. I'm there.
Brilliant. Well, a special thank you to Lieutenant General retired Mike Dana for all of the insights and stories. I do feel like we just started the conversation in so many different areas. I have my key takeaway notes of things that I want to think about differently. And so I want to thank you again for the time and for the coaching as we're trying to help this great system. So
really appreciate it. Thanks again.